I am very excited about today's call. This is one of the topics that we see, we get a lot of people come across our plate here at Fourlane because Intuit knows that we can handle a lot of these calls, knows that we can go in and do some things that other firms have not worked out yet or don't want to deal with. Let's be real, corruption is not fun. But we're going to be talking about QuickBooks desktop file corruption today. So we have a panel discussion. Basically, we hope that in hearing some of the situations that people have gone through, if you ever have gone through these situations yourself, maybe you know how to handle it better in the future. Also, maybe you don't feel like you're so crazy because sometimes the file can make us feel like we're a little nutty. So hopefully hearing some of these stories, there will be some takeaways on how to handle them and also what to do. What are some resources, some tools that you can have in your tool belt? Also just to look out for some of these things. Sometimes the corruption creeps in very slowly and you don't notice it for years. So things to keep an eye out for as well. But we're super excited for you all to be joining us today. As always, we do have our YouTube channel. I was just talking about that. So if you missed any of our videos or want to check out the playlist, that is this QuickBooks Enterprise tutorial, you can go back, you can go and see that on our YouTube channel. Definitely subscribe so you can follow and see any of our future videos. We do have a Facebook group as well, Fourlane QuickBooks Enterprise Facebook group. I see 1 or 2 people trickle in every week. Not seeing a lot of activity in there recently, but if you have questions, you want to talk to some other people in the QuickBooks Enterprise space, other users, that's a good place to do so. I always mention our on-demand support because our customers always say, I didn't know you guys did this. So we do have on-demand support. If you don't want to have to call Intuit support, you can call us instead. So that is an option. If you need any information about it, just ping me in chat and I will definitely get you over the information. So let's get into the meat of today. So we have a couple people joining us on the call today. So I'm Marjorie Adams, and then we have 3 of our partners, Kat, Laura, and Kaylin, and they are our experts today for the corruption. So what our plan is that most of the time, you guys all know if you've watched my webinars before, I like to spend most of my time in product. I do not like to spend time looking at a PowerPoint. So I'm going to switch over and go in product. And as we're going through some of these situations, I'll be poking around so you can follow along and see what we're talking about today. So I'm going to kick things off and ask Kat if you can tell us the most jaw-dropping corruption that you've ever seen in QuickBooks. Like, what was the most surprising one that you can remember?
So, I mean, I think the jaw-dropping, anytime a client's down, right, it's like, oh no, what are we going to do? But I think one of the biggest pieces of corruption that we saw, and I haven't seen it as much recently, but certainly the first time I saw it when we were running into target chaining errors in QuickBooks, which is where customer payments were getting disconnected from invoices from years back, or also on the AP side where the bill payment checks were getting disconnected from bills going years back. So customers were having, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of transactions show open when they would run like their AR aging detail or AP aging detail. That was definitely like, I'm getting a payment from my customer and I have no idea what they actually owe me. So that was definitely probably the biggest one. When I first saw that, I was like, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right? We get notes before we go into consults or demos. I'm like, this makes no sense. And I look up, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess, yeah, that's a problem.
So when you say target chaining errors, I know for the people who have had them, we're sorry. That's like it's like saying Voldemort or something around here. I don't know.
Yeah.
But how do you identify that? Like, where do you know that there are target chain errors?
So if you go and run your, well, first off, if you run a verify, you will get errors that will show up and say that there's target chaining errors. But also if you go and run, you know, an open, like an AP aging detail, or even any of those windows, right? You go to run your pay bills, right? Vendors pay bills, or run an AP aging detail report, you'll see, you know, hundreds potentially or thousands of open transactions that the customer's like, I know I paid this. Some of those may be out of balance where you click on it and it looks like it's been paid or not, you know. So, and we also have open bill payment checks as well. So that's how we know that we've seen that, because normally, right, our clients are reviewing that AP aging detail report or AP aging summary, or we are on their behalf, and we're making sure that there's not any old lingering open transactions, and there'll just be tons of them. So that's the easiest way to find it.
So when you go in and you look and you say, or like vendors pay bills, as you're saying, you all of a sudden have a ton of bills in here and you know that you paid them. That's a good, don't let the system make you feel crazy, right? It's a good,
yeah.
good one. Laura, what about you? What's the most?
Target chaining errors too. I had a client that was in QuickBooks Pro, and they had actually gone way above the recommended limit for file size, and they decided, okay, well, let's go to Enterprise, and so they upgraded to Enterprise. And I mean, their file was probably about a gig to begin with, and so going up to Enterprise, it's still a large file, but oh my goodness, the target chaining errors were, I don't know, hundreds of target chaining errors. Their financials were off. We'd go in and open up a bill, and it would have a customer as the vendor. And so that one, I think, was probably the biggest one. We kind of looked at maybe deleting and solving that by re-importing transactions. And we decided to just build a new file, just start fresh.
Yeah. Not too much. And so everybody's aware too, right? Inside of the QuickBooks database, your customer list, vendor list, employee list, and other names list actually all resides in one table. And then they're separated by, is this a customer? Is this a vendor? Is this, you know, and you can see that in a lot of places. But if you go into write checks and you click on the pay to the order of and hit Control L, it'll take you to the list of all in one list. You can see I have customers, vendors, employees, other names, all on one list. So when she says like that a vendor is showing up as a customer, that sounds completely crazy to us, but then hearing that they're actually on the same list, it means that there's probably some corruption within just this list. It's not multiple tables that are cross talking to each other somehow. Doesn't mean that it makes us feel any less crazy, but a little bit better, slightly better. Kaylin, what about you?
All right, well, mine's about the customers as well, but not really the target chaining. I was looking at the balance sheet, and their accounts receivable was really low. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right, that their AR would be so low. And so then I ran an AR summary report, which had a different number. Okay, so I was like, all right, well,
that was scary.
It's weird. We've got a different number. Oh, it gets worse. Oh, wait. So I was like, okay. I wrote down 3 customers and 3 balances. Okay. And then I went to the customer center. And guess what? They were different there too. Like, what is happening? Not only were they different, but the lists were out of order. So then when I resorted, then it changed again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here?
Yeah, it is hard when you, especially like you don't do anything transactionally. So in reports like this, so this is, right, in the customer center, this is a report. This is a total. It's a report is summarizing data, right? That's all a report is. And so this is a report. It's summarizing data. And so it's quite scary when you see these numbers change when these numbers change when you haven't done anything, right? Nothing else has been changed. Like, it's just on my computer. Nobody else has access to it. I'm not in multi-user mode. Nobody else could be putting something in here, and yet this number is changing. One of the things that we used to see most frequently, I'm sure everybody at some point has seen the balance sheet out of balance. So that's probably the most frequent. It's not jaw-dropping because it's pretty boring at this point because we know how to fix it. But the balance sheet out of balance, when you go and you run your balance sheet and, and it pops a little box that says your balance sheet's out of balance. Basically, if you look at your total assets and your total liabilities and equity, those two things don't balance. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that most of the time, if you switch it from total only to total by month, then it goes back into balance. It is a error, is a problem in the coding of the report for total only. So if you flip it to total by month and things go back in balance, then you just know it's a problem with the report. If you flip it to total by month and it's still out of balance, you got a problem with your data, right? Then we're talking corruption. Then we're talking corruption. So Kat, how about, because this happens to us a lot too, how about tell me about a time when a client called you thinking it was corruption, but it was actually user error. How did we uncover that?
So I thought about that, and I, was kind of thinking about the same situation, but it actually happened with two different customers. So that the accounts, like how they're set up, right, that type does matter. So I had a client that had, they're running the profit and loss as an example, and they see interest expense represented as a negative on their profit and loss, but like not showing the right direction, or interest income showing as a negative. And they're like, this isn't right. Like, interest income, it should still be a positive number because it's subtracting that out. And it took some going through it and explaining that, right, that those accounts had just been set up incorrectly. So we had, interest income as an example set up as an other expense type account. So it was just flipping it on the report because it wasn't set up as the right type. We had another client, kind of a similar situation, but we had set up for them a workflow where we were using a clearing account, and their accountant came in and said, in doing their year-end audit, said, oh no, that needs to be, because it doesn't zero out at the end of every month exactly because it's a clearing account. But they said, oh, that needs to be a income account. Well, you can change a bank account to an income account. I definitely wouldn't recommend it, but that caused some corruption in their file because you can only make, deposit and check type transactions to a bank account. So when you flip that to income, it causes issues with the file, which you can fix by changing it back to a bank account. That was a fun one.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's fascinating. I'm just going to leave it at that. That's fascinating. Kaylin, what about you? What about a time when the client thought that they had some corruption, but it ended up being user error?
So fairly recently, we built the client a new file because their file had corruption in it. So this client's already just a little bit nervous, right? Because they just had the corruption and we're like, hey, we got rid of it. Here's this brand new file. Here, go. Right? And their accountant was in it and was like, oh my gosh, and I forget if it was bills or journal entries. It's all gone. It's all gone. I'm telling you. So I was like, oh, I want to jump on a call. Okay, hey, where did it go? When they created the user profile, they forgot to give them in the user roles permissions to see all the pieces to do their job.
Oh, no.
I was like, oh no.
Oh, that's funny. So they in whatever role they were in, they did not give them access to be able to see journal entries, as an example.
Correct. So when they
hilarious.
received a file and were already nervous because they came from a file that was corruption, they're like, oh my God, it's corrupt. Everything's wrong. And I'm like, hold on.
Wait. That's a good one. I don't think I've heard that one before. That's a really good one. Fascinating. Laura, what about you?
Yes, I was thinking about that. I think the one that stands out is I had a client that they were trying to run a couple rebuilds on their file, and they kept having some issues around items not balancing. And their file was starting to run a little slow, and just seeing some different issues like that. And we said, okay, so how are you running your sales workflow? How are you running your purchase workflow? So we started trying to zero into that, because we had actually gone to the point of sending this to our tech department to see if they could do a repair on the file, and they said it's not needing a repair, it's a workflow. And so we ended up finding out, I think we had 2 or 3 calls with them, we ended up finding out that there were some people in the inventory department on their custom items, they were changing the item name every time they had to do a new custom item. And so QuickBooks didn't know what to do. So we had to go through and correct how we set these up, and not changing, once an item is named, not going back and changing it when you are going to set up a new custom part.
So basically, because whenever you edit an item name, it touches the audit trail for that item for all history, and the transactions for all history, and because it's a custom item, they probably used it a lot.
Yes. All the time.
Oh no. Oh, that's harsh. It's hard, but what a lot of work. I mean, for them just to have to go in and edit the item every single time, that we probably cut out a tremendous amount of work on their part, because that would be super annoying to have to go in and do that. And I don't even know, I don't know if you can do the multi-user mode or not, but wow, that's fascinating. Okay, how about, Laura, why don't I stick with you on this? What's the most common corruption that you see with your clients?
Oh, around negative inventory. I deal with this weekly with negative inventory. Oh goodness. I don't even know where to start with this one. So I've had several clients that we go through, and we go clean up inventory, and you know, they'll go, well, my file's being really sluggish, and you know, what do we do? And I think the one that really stands out to me happened back in 2019. It was towards the end of 2019, and the client called me and they said, oh my gosh, Laura, we're trying to rebuild the file because we're crashing. Our users keep getting locked out of QuickBooks. It's crashing. We can't rebuild. We can't do a backup. We need help. And they weren't too high. Well, they were probably around 850 megabytes at the time in Enterprise. And I said, okay, let me run through our process. We have this process called Never Negative. And so I went in and cleaned up all historical instances of negative inventory. So every time the client sold to a customer but didn't have quantity on hand, it would cause that item to go negative. And so historically, that was stuck in the system as a negative item or negative quantity. And so I went through and ran through this process and took out all of those historical instances of negative inventory. Went through, ran a verify, was able to run the rebuilds, was able to back up the file and got their users back in it. And so it saved the day, because they were really scared. They thought they were losing their file. They thought this was it. We waited too long. We're done. And so it kind of saved the day, but it was around that negative inventory.
Negative inventory, yep. That is, and I don't even know, I mean, it's not that it's corruption. This is not just a QuickBooks thing too, right? When you go into other softwares, they do have the same settings where you don't allow inventory to run negative. And if you don't have that checked off, you will get some of the same problems that happen with QuickBooks negative inventory. Just no systems really like that, running to the negative values. Caitlin, what about you? What's the most common that you've seen?
Definitely negative inventory.
Yeah. Second that.
It's when When I first read the question, I was thinking the strangest piece that I've had with negative inventory, and I was like, how did this happen? You know, QuickBooks does average costing, right? And things can be negative. And sometimes the average cost would be negative just because the quantity, so things, I mean, it flubs up sometimes. And so we were going in and we were fixing it, and we removed all of the items in this particular thing. So all the quantities were zero, all the costs were zero, we started over, right? So I handed back with all the zeros, and he's like, great, but I'm selling this, I forget what it was, let's say a pen. Selling this pen, and I have a negative cost of goods sold that's skewing my financials. I was like, what? So every time he sold it, because the cost was in there as a negative, his cost of goods sold would decrease instead of increase.
Because it doesn't, I mean, it's just math. It's just a calculator. That's all it's just calculating. And if you take negative quantity times positive, amount, what it's supposed to be, then that's a negative number, and a negative cost is a debit, and that is that is the same as income. So system does what it's supposed to do. We're just not doing what we're supposed to do. Kat, how about you?
Sure. So I think it's not just like what we see. Definitely negative inventory seems to be super common. But the other one is just from clients that are importing data into QuickBooks via IIF files, which can cause all kinds of things to run amok. So I've seen random characters in the class list as an example. So you go run your profit and loss by class, and maybe you only really have 2 classes, but you've actually got like 200 now because you have asterisk and percent and quotes, right? Are all classes now in your file. Also, the way that those IIF files come in, right, is they don't really check to see what's already there. It's just pushing that file in. So we've had some, where they're pushing in those IIF files, and instead of hitting a vendor, they're hitting an other name. Well, there's a limit to that list, like how many you can have. But also just transactions. I was talking to a client yesterday, in fact, that does manages accounts receivable and accounts payable outside of QuickBooks, and they're importing IIF files, and they're having those actually push over real invoices and real bills into QuickBooks, and it's also pushing real payments and real bill payments, but they're not actually applied to anything when they come in. So their file's like 4 gigs now. We talked about workflow. We talked about changing up how they're importing. Because we definitely, in some of these ladies to talk to too, right? Like we want to solve the problem, right? But we also want to avoid that from happening in the future. So I did show them this fix unapplied vendor payments and credits, and I said, definitely don't do this in your live file. But my guess is it would probably crash if you ran it because of how many years of data you have or you've been doing this. So that's also where we kind of talk about, do we need to start fresh as well?
QuickBooks definitely has it expects certain things to happen, just like any computer. It expects that you're going to go in and reconcile your bank statement. It expects you're going to pay your bills. It expects you're going to receive payments against your invoices, and that they're going to get closed out at some point. And when we're functioning in a way that it doesn't expect, then the processing volume to do something like run your open accounts payable report, when your open accounts payable report for all time has every single transaction just not applied to each other, it's going to hurt the database, right? It's going to hurt the speed because they're not expecting that to happen. They expect that AP should be pretty minimal compared to if I ran like a report for, some kind of like purchases by vendor or something like that. So it's just the expectation is different in the database.
Yep, definitely. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Right, exactly. So I'm going to stick with you, Kat, on this, and I'll just kind of open it up to Laura and Kaylin to add in, but this is a question too that came in on chat from Kimby. So explain to me how you make the judgment when you're working with clients in a file that possibly has corruption. How do you decide if the file is too corrupt and that we should start a fresh file? Like what are those tipping points?
So I definitely think that size and complexity, right? So as an example, that client that I was talking through yesterday, I was already trying, talking and giving them my opinion that I think we should just start fresh, because it doesn't make sense to have to go in and clean up these thousands of transactions over years to get them to then just flip the workflow completely and not be carrying AR and AP in QuickBooks. So definitely like the size of the file, right? How involved is the issue? One of the things that we do here is not only we get a lot of clients calling in with corruption, but a lot of times their files are also way too big for enterprise even. So when we're looking at those, if they have to do a repair, and then also we need to do, a condensed service on the file, and also clean up on top of that, right? Budget can also come into play. That's why I usually say size and complexity, right? Is it going to be easier to start fresh? And even if we don't have exact balances to start with right away, right, we can get them up and running in a new file and then come back to that.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, Kat. Was thinking about that one client that I had that had converted from Pro up to desktop when their file was already around a gig in Pro, caused all of those target chaining errors, and the file was just a mess. And so it was more cost effective to go and start fresh. We used a tax return to do beginning balances, and then just started fresh with the current year so that they could get up and running.
Another thing to take into account is trust, right? You trust, you rely on this QuickBooks file. And so there is a level of, at the point that you start to see numbers not balance and not make sense, you have to trust it, right? So that is something that comes into play. I've had a couple of people come to me and they're like, I just don't trust my numbers. And if I can't trust my numbers, I can't make business decisions.
So getting back to a good place of trust is also a good tipping point. So we did have another question here. Maybe you guys can help out with from the audience. It said, if you have an item that you have not used for many years, maybe it's discontinued, is it okay to change the item name? Like sometimes we update it to the new model, or what would be best practice for handling a situation like that? You want to take that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So best practice would be to create a new item for the new model instead of updating. Because we got to keep in mind too is that when we update, even though we haven't used it in years, it does change that for all time. Mm-hmm. And so when you go back and look and run reports, you're going to see that new model, and you're not going to see what it used to be. Mm-hmm. So it's going to carry all of that history forward with it.
So you actually don't know what was sold as the new model versus the old model. And then the other thing too is that that average cost, if you are using average cost, and that average cost never goes away. So whatever you've done in history can affect today. So you have to have awareness around that too, if there's anything lingering out there. Cool. All right, guys, we're right at 12:30. I said we end on time, start on time, end on time. So I want to thank our panel again for joining us today. We are going to have a construction panel next week. Super excited about that. And as always, if you guys have things that you want to see in future courses, definitely let us know. If you have topics that you need covered, things that you're struggling with, we can hit that in one of our webinars. Definitely let us know. That's all we got for today. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, guys.